What's going on, guys? Brooks Anderson, really excited to bring y'all another video today. Today's video is going to be all about bed fishing. I'm going to be sharing my top 5 kind of tricks of the trade when I do sight fish out there on the water, whether I'm in a tournament and kind of forced into it, or if I'm out there just fun fishing. These are definitely some tips and tricks you may not have already thought of or been doing out there when you do see a big one locked on the bed that can make a huge difference in catching that fish or spending a few hours and getting frustrated. So definitely looking forward to today's video. Went out there on Lake Lanier the other day. Actually got some pretty cool footage of some big ones we caught off bed. So definitely going to be rolling those over me talking to kind of explain what I am doing, and then we'll jump into all the tips and tricks as well. Hope you all enjoy this and learn a thing or two about sight fishing. Let's jump into it. All right, guys, let's go ahead and kick things off with how to actually locate these beds and where these fish like to spawn. I'm going to talk about Lake Lanier just for an example. That's my home lake, but this stuff definitely applies to a bunch of different bodies of water if you are not specifically fishing Lanier. A couple things I like to keep in mind when I just go out and I'm looking for some of these sight fish. I really want north-facing pockets, and what that allows these fish to do is have the maximum amount of sunlight hitting them on their beds for the majority of the day. So that's one thing you can look at on your map, is just find those pockets that are north facing. Those are really going to help y'all eliminate a lot of that dead water. And the second thing you really need to take into account is bottom composition. These fish are not going to spawn on that kind of mucky, silty, kind of nasty bottom. They want something hard that they can lay their eggs on. For Lanier example, a lot of the spotted bass and largemouth pretty much predominantly only spawn on sand. They will spawn on some clay and next to some other stuff, but sand is where a lot of these big largemouth and spots choose to bed on. So that's an example of another way to really shortcut a lot of those areas that don't have bed fish. If I'm going down an extremely rocky bank that's just kind of jagged and all that, I'm not really going to see a lot of beds. But if I get to a little short end pocket that has a couple laydowns, for example, and a little bit of kind of that green moss grass and that sand mixed in, those are the areas those fish will definitely pull up and spawn in. So those are a couple of things I keep in mind when I'm actually locating these beds. Now, as we move into actually seeing a bed and what to do from there, I'm gonna walk you through the full process of my kind of mindset and how I go about doing that. So say I'm on the trolling motor, I typically like to keep it pretty high and cover a lot of water. I'm not necessarily scared of getting that fish to shoot off the bank and spooking it at first. If that fish is in the right stage of the spawn, he's going to come back to that bed. So it's definitely more powerful for me to keep that trolling motor on high and keep moving rather than being all stealthy and kind of just slowly working my way through an area. If you are traditionally fishing for a lot of those fish, I don't recommend staying on the trolling motor on 10 and just ripping through there. That's not a good idea. But if you are specifically looking for these bed fish that are locked on in the proper stage of the spawn, definitely moving through there really fast and then circling back around is a kind of proven way I've done it that's really effective. I can roll through an area and then I'll kind of make mental notes or waypoints of where those fish I think are spawning, and then I'll circle my boat back around and see how those fish are positioned and actually locked onto the bed. Now that we've kind of touched on a couple of things to look for and kind of locate some of these spawning fish, let's go ahead and jump into if that fish is something I deem catchable and in the correct stage of the spawn. It can be really tricky at times during these spring months. A lot of these fish are just either rolling or they're just getting up there pre-spawn, even post-spawn at times, and there's a lot to break down when you are sight fishing. So the foremost thing I look for is how interested and kind of engaged that buck is with the actual bed. If he is circling really tight, not leaving that area, and is not too afraid of my boat in the area, I kind of deem that as a catchable fish. If I can flip my bait in there within a reasonable amount of time and he acknowledges my bait there and it shows interest, I definitely can catch that fish after a while. But if I'm flipping in there and he's making big circles and he's just not really paying attention, then that fish may not be catchable, and it's probably one I'm not going to really spend a lot of time with. Now, the females are a whole different thing. We're going to jump into that too. A lot of the times they'll be paired up and the female will be hanging off a couple feet further from the bed while the buck is up there pretty much doing all the hard work. So definitely a lot we got to look at on that side of things too. But the first and foremost thing, if that buck is engaged and kind of really defending that area, then that is a catchable fish. And a lot of the times in tournaments, I really don't even mess with the females. If I can just find a couple above average, upper 3 to almost 5 pound bucks at times out on Lanier, there's a lot of 4 pound buck bass. Those can be the ones that you can pull up and catch in a few minutes and keep rolling. And you don't really have to invest the time on some of those bigger females, but you can do both, but that's kind of my style of doing it as well. Now, when it goes into catching the female, a couple things you have to keep in mind. The females are a lot trickier than the buck bass. They're not quite as aggressive, but there's a couple of things we're going to touch on in today's video with these tricks to get those big ones to actually fire and eat your bait. So the first thing I like to do is, honestly, I really don't like to catch the buck bass. You hear people talk about there's a 50-50 chance if you catch the buck, she pulls up and locks on, but more times than not, I've seen it where I've caught the buck bass and that female just kind of shoots out of there and pays no interest. There's been times, obviously, where I do catch that buck and that female immediately goes up there, gets all defensive and locks on and defends that bed, but as a general rule of thumb, what I've seen in my lifetime of bed fishing is if you can shake that buck off and keep antagonizing him, that female is going to feel more prone and apt to slide up on that bed and get defensive. And I think you have a lot higher chances of catching that female if you don't just yank the buck out of there in a few casts. So definitely that's one thing to keep in mind. It can be frustrating at times when you have that buck bass eat 20 plus times and he's swimming off with your bait and everything, but I promise you, a lot more times than not, if you can keep that buck engaged, it'll get to a point where that female is just not going to take it anymore and she's going to slide up on the bed and start kind of helping out and getting defensive as well. So let's go ahead and jump into a couple of things I like to do that actually allows me to catch these bedfish a lot quicker than some people, I think, and definitely some things I would keep in mind when y'all are out there on the water sight fishing. So first and foremost, like we talked about, I like to kind of move fast to find these beds initially and then circle back to the ones I think are in the right stage of the spawn that are pretty locked on and aggressive and actually guarding that bed. So what I like to do is the first and foremost thing is really think about my boat positioning and how that shadow and everything is casting on that bed. This can be a huge deciding factor of getting that fish to bite or even acknowledge your bait at times. If your boat is too close or kind of blocking their zone where they're usually circling around, that can be an automatic just turn off for those fish to not bite at all. So definitely really take into account where your boat is set up, where that shadow is being casted, and don't really try to block off that fish's area. If he is on the side of a point, for example, in a little pocket, don't put your boat right in front of him where he feels trapped and he can't leave if he needs to. Try to get off to the side and make your boat as I try to do it as narrow as possible, where the whole broad side of the boat is not in front of the bed. I like to either be just the nose of the boat, or even I'll sometimes pull down, get on the back deck, whatever I got to do to just kind of minimize my presence in the water in front of that bedfish. So definitely boat positioning can be a huge thing to take into account, and definitely do not overlook that. If that fish is not acknowledging your bait, not giving you any time of day, change your boat up, maybe move over to the left, to the right, try to narrow that whole broad side of your boat and get it as small as possible in front of that bed, and then also kind of really pay attention to your distance away from that bed. And those can be a couple of things that really impact catching that fish or not. All right, so moving into the second thing I take into account is something that a lot of people I think may have overlooked a lot of the times, and it really is important to kind of take that fish for itself. And what I mean by that is not every bedfish is going to be acting the same. Each fish's personality and kind of the way it operates and mannerisms are completely different from each other. So there's not just one bait or one style of doing it that works across the board. There's definitely some things that work more times than not, but definitely kind of analyze that fish and his mannerisms and what he's doing on that bed for itself. Don't go catch a bedfish in one pocket and be like, okay, I'm gonna go to my next bedfish, do the exact same thing. He's gonna bite at the same time. I've got it figured out. It's not like patterning fish at all. Each fish is in a different stage of the spawn, and you kind of have to read that fish's aggression and the way he's moving around for what that fish is. So that's definitely something to take into account. Some buck bass up there, you can flip 2-3 times and he'll bite it, and that's all it is. Other ones you'll spend 30 minutes to an hour on. So definitely, I really like to figure out what that fish is doing and really hone into what key area he is guarding on that bed. That is the biggest thing that I do when I'm reading a fish is I'm trying to figure out that general small spot that he keeps circling back to and is getting extremely protective over when I'm catching the buck and the female. That's a huge deal to find that kind of sweet spot inside of that bed, and not just aimlessly throwing up there. If you can find that small area where that buck is really honed into, that can be something that really speeds up the whole process and can save you a lot of headache that would take 30 minutes or an hour, or could take 5 minutes if you do find that spot really quickly. So definitely one thing I would keep in mind is just analyzing that fish for what it is and not trying to just classify them all as just one bed fish. So definitely think about that when you are approaching a bed fish, and don't try to rush it. Take a few minutes before you make that cast and really figure out what that fish is doing right there. All right, so thirdly, something that gets overlooked a lot, in my opinion, as well, is bait selection. A lot of guys love throwing white baits. There's nothing wrong with white baits. They're extremely easy to see from the angler perspective, but I challenge y'all in a couple ways to kind of branch out from that and try some different profiles and colors that I've seen that have worked a little bit more effectively on the bed than just simply a pearl white crawl. So a lot of the times I actually lean towards more natural colors. A lot of the times these bedfish are constantly fighting off and chasing bluegill off their beds, so I kind of opt towards more of a green pumpkin style crawl or creature bait a lot of the times over a white. It is a little bit harder to see on your end, but more times than not, that more natural color seems to help me catch those fish a little bit better, for sure. Not to say throwing on a white bait on a cloudy day isn't something you may need to do just to see your bait and understand what's going on. For sure, I absolutely do it as well. But if I can and the conditions do permit it, I'm definitely going to go with a natural bait first. And in correlation to actually selecting the color of bait, I cycle through a lot of baits more so than more people. Like I said in the last kind of bit there, each fish is a little bit different. So you may catch one fish extremely quick on a crawl, and then you may go to your next bed fish and he paid no attention in the world to a creature bait. So definitely I like to have a couple things rigged up on the deck and multiple options to throw in there. I've seen it as times where I've thrown a crawl in there multiple times. I'll throw a shaking in there, catch that fish first time. I'll throw a wacky rig in there, catch that fish first time. There's a lot of the times where I just make one quick adjustment and something changes with that fish and what he's thinking, and he'll immediately bite it. Not saying that's going to happen every time, but definitely if you have a fish engaged on a certain bait, showing him something different a few times and then going back to that initial bait that he is kind of more passionate about can be definitely something to play into your arsenal for sure. So like I said, when you have to treat each fish individually and what stage he is in the spawn, that kind of ties in directly to that bait selection for me. So I'm not just going to have one white crawl on the deck and go out there and say, all right, I'm going sight fishing today. I'm gonna have a couple different things, whether that's a shaky head, kind of a more natural creature bait, glide bait, just some different stuff to kind of trigger those fish and see what I can get them to react to and what they don't like. All right, so the last tip I'm going to give y'all today is casting. It seems pretty basic. Everyone knows to throw past the bed, not make a giant splash, but actually kind of numbering your cast and figuring out why that fish is going to bite or how he's not going to bite is something I definitely like to take into account as well. There's some bed fish where repetitive casting, very quickly getting that fish fired up, is a great way to catch that fish. Other times, leaving that bait in the bed for a greater amount of time is actually a way to get that fish to bite quicker. So definitely reading those fish. If that buck or female is locked on, I typically will like to cast repeatedly in a quickly fashion just to try to hit them upside the head and get them fired up pretty quickly. But there's a lot of times where that female is just guarding that area and kind of hanging off the bed and leaving that bait and kind of just soaking it in that area you've already established is kind of their core zone, and leaving it there, that's a way to actually get that female to pull up and acknowledge that bait. And kind of hand in hand with that is you really need to pay attention to where that fish is in the water before you make a cast. If he's looking straight at you and you plop it right on his head, a lot of the times that's not going to be the best thing to do. What I like to do a lot of times is wait till that fish is turned, is not really looking at the bed, get my bait in there and allow that fish to kind of notice it and then come in there afterwards. And then also I do like to hit the fish with the bait, definitely not snagging or anything of that nature, but kind of snapping it in front of them or hitting them on the back or something, dragging it over them. That can be a huge thing to speed up the whole process and get that fish really fired up and kind of just in that mindset that something is trying to eat the eggs or disturb what's going on. And that can really speed up everything for sure, is actually making contact with that fish with your bait. Like I said, not snagging anything like that, but just kind of hitting that fish upside the head or down his back, reeling it over him, stuff like that. That can really trigger a fish for sure. Other fish it does absolutely nothing to, and they want to come in and notice that bait on the bed when they are gone. That can be another powerful thing like I touched on too. But like I said, you just have to treat every fish a little bit differently and kind of read those fish for what they are and what stage they're in. I appreciate y'all tuning in today's video. Hopefully a couple of those tips and tricks really help y'all's bed fishing game when you're out there on the water this spring. If y'all haven't already, check out my fish tips down below. I have a weekly style report that I put out on Lake Lanier covering all the juice with the herring spawn, areas, location, tactics, everything we're doing out there day in and day out, catching these big bags of spots on that herring spawn. It's a lot of fun right now, so definitely if you want to get some pointers and insights next time you hit the water, check out that. All that information will be linked down below. If y'all are interested in getting out on the water on a guide trip, I'll be home for almost 3 months. So definitely May, June, July. Hit me up if you want to learn this post-spawn, offshore bite, topwaters, flukes, all that kind of fun stuff. It's going to be an absolute blast out there this summer. I'd love to have you out on the water for a day. So definitely check out all that information down below. Like I said, you can find my website and my fish tips, everything you need to go fish Lake Lanier, and we'll see you on the next one.